Welcome back. The man who once declared he'd take a bullet for President Trump is now, figuratively speaking, firing one at him. Michael Cohen's lawyer gave CNN a recording of a conversation with his then client, Donald Trump, about buying the rights to former Playboy model's story, Karen McDougal, claiming a months-long affair. Now, the tape shows that, contrary to White House statements, President Trump did, in fact, know about the proposed payoff 2 months before the election, even if he ultimately never made the payment, as his legal team says. Cohen appears to tell Mr. Trump about his plans to set up a shell company to buy the story rights from the National Enquirer's publisher. Now, the publisher paid Karen McDougal $150,000 for her story and for the right to kill it. We should note that NBC News hasn't confirmed that the original recording wasn't edited or altered. Here is a key part where Cohen seems to refer to publisher head David Pecker.
I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David, so that I'm going to do that right away. I've actually come up and I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up with funding. Yes.
President Trump blasted Cohen in a tweet this morning asking, quote, what kind of a lawyer would tape a client? So sad. Some might ask, why would somebody hire a lawyer like this? That's another question. Joined now by Mimi Rocah, MSNBC legal analyst and a former assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. All right, Mimi, I think that a lot of focus has been on what's on the tape, when the more important aspect in all this may be the fact that Michael Cohen chose to publicly disclose the tape. Why is it more important in your mind, and frankly the minds of most legal analysts, that just the action of Cohen doing this is so meaningful? Forget what the substance of the tape is.
Well, Chuck, I think it signals in a sharp way what he's been signaling for the past couple of weeks, which is his break in loyalty from Trump. As you said at the beginning, everyone knows that he famously or infamously said he would take a bullet for Donald Trump. And it is that loyalty that needed to sort of be broken in order for him to psychologically really be able to come around and decide to cooperate. And I don't know if he's taken any actual steps to do that with prosecutors, but, I think that doing something like this, trying to really expose Trump in the way that he has, really, again, signals and blinking lights that he wants to cooperate. And
all right. But I'm curious, you as a prosecutor, a former prosecutor, wouldn't you feel more comfortable if Michael Cohen just called you up and said, hey, I want to talk?
Absolutely.
I have something I've shown you. Like, what I don't get is, why buy a billboard? Because essentially what he did is he bought a billboard and he went ahead and bought a billboard in Times Square to say, hey, give me a deal.
Right.
Why do this publicly?
I agree. I don't think it's a good strategy, quite honestly.
Okay.
If he wants to cooperate, he should keep his mouth shut and go talk to the cooperators and not talk to the press and not be on this PR campaign. But for whatever reason, I do think I view from when he erased Trump from his Twitter, when he erased the Trump Organization, I view this as his public breakup. He literally needs to have a break with him. This is someone he looked up to and was very close to. This reminds me of almost every mafia case I did for about 6 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I'm telling you that the best...
The consigliere has to suddenly feel scorned?
Well, yes, I think Trump did a lot here to sort of push Cohen if he ends up in the arms of the government, because he really didn't do himself any favors by sort of sidelining him, in the past couple of months. But, the best cooperators in the organized crime world and elsewhere are the people who were the most loyal to their supervisors or bosses, because they know the secrets. And the whole point, as you pointed out, the fact that Trump is complaining now about Cohen sort of underhandedly taping him, which it is underhanded, and no legitimate lawyer would do that. But that's exactly why Trump picked Cohen as his lawyer. He didn't go out and get a real lawyer. He picked Cohen because he would do that kind of dirty work.
He was
with
looking
Trump.
for his specific resume and a specific willingness,
Exactly.
objective on that resume.
Exactly.
Not your normal. And I guess what do they say about spurned lovers, right? They can be the most vicious, and however you want to, whatever this
Right.
relationship is.
Yes.
That's how they vicious. Let me ask you this: why isn't it? Why shouldn't we interpret him as begging for a pardon? Why couldn't it be a flashing billboard for that? Or is this his response of finding out he can't get one?
So, I mean, this is getting really deep in the mind of Michael Cohen. But, Mr. Avenatti's been out there saying that he does think this is Cohen appealing for a pardon. Still, I don't think so, because I think that there are so many things that he has said that are sort of irreversible at this point about Trump. He's not just sending signals anymore. He's shouting from the mountaintops bad things about Trump, things that are damaging or could be damaging to Trump. And so if he's looking for a pardon for a man like Trump, I don't think he's going to get it.
Very quickly, Alan Weisselberg, he is the lone guy from the Fred Trump era that has sort of stayed with Donald Trump the whole time. Should he be getting his own lawyer?
I would if I were him. I mean, the way his name comes up on this recording, I think this recording is not standing alone, but is a good piece of evidence that prosecutors could use, particularly with Mr. Cohen, if he cooperates, against Weisselberg and others in a conspiracy charge. All
right. Mimi Rocha, thank you for providing your expertise. Southern District of New York expertise, very useful these days. So thanks for coming on, sharing your views. Up ahead, a red flag for Republicans, signs that the big blue Midwestern Democratic wall that collapsed in 2016, it may be on the way to being rebuilt. That's next. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.